The most exhausting battle in your life may not be happening outside of you. It may be happening quietly, every single night, inside your own mind, because all day long, you can escape yourself without even realizing it. You can stay busy, talk to people, scroll endlessly, laugh in conversations, pretend everything is normal, pretend your heart is not carrying invisible weight, and for a while, the distractions work. But the moment the world becomes silent, the moment the lights go off, the moment your head finally touches the pillow, the mind begins speaking. Suddenly old memories return, painful moments replay themselves, future fears grow louder, tiny problems start feeling overwhelming, and the thoughts you escaped during the day slowly surround you in the darkness. Your body feels exhausted, but your mind refuses to rest. No matter how tired you are, the inner noise keeps growing. You try to sleep, but the mind keeps replaying everything. You try to relax, but your chest still feels heavy. You tell yourself to stop thinking, but the silence only makes the thoughts louder. But Buddhism teaches something most people never realize. Nighttime is not creating your suffering. Nighttime is revealing the suffering distraction was hiding during the day. Because during the day, the world keeps your attention occupied. But at night, there is nowhere left to run from yourself anymore. And maybe that is why your mind becomes loud before sleep. Not because you are weak, not because you are broken, but because your soul has been emotionally exhausted for far too long in silence. And tonight, you may finally understand why your mind cannot stay quiet, why silence feels so heavy, and how true inner peace begins the moment you stop fighting yourself in the darkness. The mind becomes loudest when silence finally exposes what you've been carrying. Most people are not truly afraid of the night. They are afraid of what the night uncovers inside them. During the day, it is very easy to escape yourself without even realizing it. The modern world gives you endless ways to stay distracted. From the moment you wake up, your attention is constantly being pulled in different directions. There is always another notification to check, another conversation to answer, another responsibility waiting for you, another screen glowing in front of your face. Your mind rarely gets a moment to simply be still. And because of this constant movement, many people never fully notice how much emotional weight they are actually carrying inside themselves. The daytime keeps you busy enough to temporarily forget your inner pain. You move from task to task, you speak to people, you laugh when you do not truly feel like laughing. You force yourself to continue functioning even when your heart feels tired. You convince yourself that you are okay simply because you are still managing to survive another day. But then nighttime arrives, the room becomes quiet. The outside world slows down, the noise disappears, the distractions lose their grip on your attention, and suddenly, there is nothing left standing between you and your own mind. This is the moment when many people begin feeling overwhelmed without understanding why. Thoughts they ignored all day suddenly become loud. Emotions they bury deep inside themselves slowly begin rising back to the surface. Memories return, worries grow stronger, a strange heaviness appears in the chest. And often people think the night created this suffering. But Buddhism teaches something much deeper. The suffering was already there. Nighttime simply revealed it. Silence has a way of exposing everything we try to outrun during the day. The sadness you never fully processed, the loneliness you kept hiding from others, the emotional exhaustion you convinced yourself to ignore, the pressure you have silently carried for years while pretending to be strong for everyone else. All of it quietly waits beneath the surface of the mind. And when life finally becomes silent enough, you can no longer avoid hearing it. This is why some people cannot sit alone quietly for very long. The moment silence appears, hidden emotions begin speaking. The mind starts replaying old wounds. The heart starts revealing truths that distractions were covering up. A person suddenly realizes how emotionally drained they truly are beneath their daily routines. Many people spend their entire lives surviving, but very few truly rest. Their body may sleep, but their mind never feels safe enough to relax. Buddhism teaches that the human mind becomes restless when the inner world has been neglected for too long. When emotions are constantly suppressed instead of understood, they do not disappear. They gather silently in the background of the mind, waiting for a quiet moment to finally be acknowledged. And nighttime gives those emotions space to rise. This is why some people feel deeply emotional before sleep, even when nothing bad happened that day. The sadness is not always coming from the present moment. Sometimes it is accumulated emotional weight from months or even years of silent inner struggle. A person may appear completely fine on the outside, while secretly feeling exhausted inside. They continue showing up for work. They continue smiling in conversations. They continue acting normal around family and friends, but deep within themselves, they feel disconnected, overwhelmed, emotionally hungry for peace. And at night, when the world finally stops demanding things from them, their inner world finally gets the opportunity to speak honestly. The mind becomes loud because the soul has been unheard for too long. This is why overthinking before sleep often feels so emotionally intense. It is not just random thinking. It is the release of pressure that has been building quietly inside the heart for a very long time. The silence of night can feel uncomfortable because silence removes illusions. It removes distraction. It removes performance. It forces a person to sit face to face with emotions they have been trying to outrun through busyness and noise. But Buddhism teaches that this moment is not something to fear. In fact, this moment can become the beginning of healing, because the mind does not become loud at night to punish you. It becomes loud because some part of you is asking to finally be seen, understood, and cared for with honesty and compassion. The sadness wants acknowledgement. The exhaustion wants rest. The anxious mind wants safety. The lonely heart wants connection. And perhaps for the first time in the entire day, nighttime gives your inner world permission to finally tell the truth about how deeply tired it has become. Sometimes the greatest suffering is not the noise inside the mind. Sometimes the greatest suffering is spending years pretending that noise does not exist. And the beautiful truth hidden inside Buddhist wisdom is this: healing begins the moment you stop running from yourself in silence. Because once you learn how to sit peacefully with your own inner world, the night slowly stops feeling like a battlefield, and little by little, it starts becoming a place where the heart can finally breathe again. The mind creates imaginary suffering at night because fear thrives in uncertainty. Have you ever noticed how the mind becomes strangely dramatic at night? Problems that felt small during the daytime suddenly begin feeling enormous before sleep. Tiny worries grow into terrifying possibilities. Simple uncertainty begins turning into emotional panic. And somehow, in the darkness of night, the mind becomes completely convinced that something is about to go wrong. This is why so many people feel anxious the moment they lie down in bed. Not because danger is actually present, but because the mind begins creating danger inside itself. During the day, distractions interrupt fearful thinking. Work keeps your attention occupied. Conversations pull your awareness outward. Noise fills the space around you. But when nighttime arrives and everything becomes quiet, fear finally gets room to speak without interruption. And fear rarely speaks calmly. It whispers worst-case scenarios. It predicts painful futures. It creates problems that do not even exist yet. Suddenly, the mind starts asking endless questions. What if my future falls apart? What if I never become successful? What if people leave me? What if I disappoint everyone? What if something bad happens tomorrow? What if I never truly feel happy again? And slowly the body begins reacting to these imagined situations as if they are already real. Your breathing changes, your chest tightens, your stomach feels heavy, your heart beats faster, even though nothing dangerous is happening in the present moment. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering is not created by reality itself. It is created by the mind's fearful relationship with uncertainty. The human mind desperately wants control. It wants guarantees about the future. It wants safety, predictability, certainty, but life cannot provide permanent certainty. The future is always unknown, and because the mind fears the unknown, It tries to protect itself by imagining every possible disaster ahead of time. But this protection becomes a prison because the mind starts suffering from situations that have never happened. This is one of the deepest reasons nighttime overthinking feels so exhausting. You are emotionally experiencing dozens of painful futures that only exist inside imagination. The body cannot always tell the difference between a real threat and a deeply believed fearful thought. So when the mind repeatedly imagines loss, failure, rejection, loneliness, or catastrophe, the nervous system reacts as if those things are already happening now. And after enough nights like this, a person begins living in constant emotional tension, even when life around them is relatively calm. This is why Buddhism places such deep importance on awareness, because awareness helps you recognize when the mind is creating unnecessary suffering through fearful imagination. The problem is not always reality itself. The problem is often the stories the mind keeps creating about reality. At night, the imagination becomes especially powerful because darkness naturally creates vulnerability. Human beings have feared darkness for thousands of years. In silence and darkness, the mind becomes more alert, more cautious, more sensitive to uncertainty, and this ancient survival instinct easily transforms into overthinking. The mind scans the future, searching for danger. It searches for problems to solve. It searches for pain before pain even arrives. But the tragic part is this: the more the mind searches for fearful possibilities, the more disconnected it becomes from the present moment. A person may be physically lying safely in bed, while mentally living through heartbreak, failure, embarrassment, loss, and disaster all at the same time. And slowly, this constant mental fear drains emotional energy from the soul. Buddhism teaches that fear grows strongest when the mind becomes attached to imagined futures instead of present awareness. Because the future itself is not truly hurting you right now, thoughts about the future are hurting you. This is why two people can face the same uncertainty but suffer very differently. One mind creates endless fear around uncertainty. The other mind learns to remain present inside uncertainty. The peaceful mind is not peaceful because life became predictable. It is peaceful because it stopped demanding certainty from life. This is one of the hardest truths for the human mind to accept. You cannot control every future outcome. You cannot predict every possibility. You cannot think your way into complete emotional safety. No amount of overthinking can guarantee protection from pain, and yet many people continue exhausting themselves every night, trying to mentally solve futures that do not even exist yet. Buddhism teaches that true peace begins when you stop treating every uncertain future like an emergency, because most of the terrible things the mind fears never actually happen. And even when difficult moments do happen, human beings often survive them far more deeply than the fearful mind believes. The mind says, "You will collapse." But again and again, people continue surviving heartbreak, disappointment, change, uncertainty, and pain. Not perfectly, not without scars, but they survive. This is why awareness matters so deeply before sleep. Awareness reminds you that thoughts are not prophecy. Fear is not truth. Imagination is not reality. Just because the mind creates a painful story does not mean that story will happen. And slowly, when this understanding becomes deeper inside you, something beautiful begins changing. The night no longer feels like a place where fear controls you. Instead, it becomes a place where you begin seeing the mind clearly for the first time. A mind constantly trying to protect itself through fearful thinking. A mind terrified of uncertainty. A mind exhausting itself by trying to control what cannot fully be controlled. And strangely, the moment you stop believing every fearful thought, the mind slowly begins softening, because fear loses power when awareness stops feeding it, and eventually, the silence of night no longer feels dangerous. It simply becomes quiet again. Your suffering deepens the moment you believe every thought is who you are. One of the biggest reasons the mind becomes so painful at night is because most people do not realize they are trapped inside complete identification with their thoughts. The moment a thought appears, they immediately believe it. If the mind whispers, "You are failing in life," they emotionally collapse into that thought. If the mind says, "You are not enough," they carry that sentence like a permanent truth. If the mind predicts rejection, loneliness, embarrassment, or loss, the body reacts as if those things are already happening. And after years of this habit, a person slowly forgets the difference between themselves and the voice inside their head. This is one of the deepest illusions Buddhism tries to help human beings understand. You are not the voice speaking inside your mind. You are the awareness listening to it. But most people never realize this because they spend their entire lives merging with every thought that appears. They do not observe thoughts, they become thoughts. And nighttime makes this even more intense, because when the world becomes silent, the voice inside the mind suddenly feels much louder and much more personal. There are no distractions left competing for your attention, no conversations interrupting the mental noise, no movement pulling you away from yourself. Just you and the non-stop voice inside your head. And for many people, that voice is not kind. It judges everything. It criticizes constantly. It replays failures. It compares your life to others. It predicts painful futures. It reminds you of old mistakes. It tells you that you are behind, broken, lost, or unworthy. And because people believe every thought automatically, they begin emotionally drowning inside mental stories that may not even be true. Buddhism teaches that thoughts are temporary mental events, not identity. They rise, they pass, they change constantly. Some thoughts are fearful, some are emotional, some are irrational, some are completely false. But the suffering begins when you stop seeing thoughts as passing experiences and start treating them as absolute truth. Imagine sitting beside a river and watching leaves float past on the water. Each leaf comes and goes naturally. Thoughts work the same way, but instead of simply observing thoughts, most people jump into the river and allow every thought to carry them away emotionally. One fearful thought becomes an hour of anxiety. One painful memory becomes self-hatred. One insecure thought becomes emotional exhaustion. This is why the mind feels so overwhelming before sleep. Because in silence, people finally hear the full intensity of the voice they have been unconsciously obeying all day. And after years of identifying with this voice, many people no longer know who they are without it. The mind says, "You are anxious." The mind says, "You are damaged." The mind says, "You will never heal." And slowly, the person begins building an identity around suffering itself. But Buddhism offers a life-changing realization. If you can observe your thoughts, then you cannot be your thoughts. There is something deeper within you that remains present even while thoughts constantly change. Awareness itself, the silent observer, the part of you that notices fear without becoming fear, the part of you that notices sadness without becoming sadness, the part of you that notices mental noise without becoming trapped inside it. This awareness is always present, even during your darkest nights. But most people are so hypnotized by thinking that they never notice the quiet awareness behind the thoughts. And this is why meditation and mindfulness are so important in Buddhism. Not because the goal is to force the mind into complete silence, but because awareness creates distance between you and your thoughts. For the first time, you begin realizing, "I can hear this thought without believing it." That single realization changes everything, because the mind loses power when every thought is no longer treated like reality. You begin noticing how inconsistent thoughts truly are. One moment, the mind says life is hopeless. The next moment, it becomes optimistic again. One moment, it predicts disaster. The next moment, everything feels manageable. Thoughts constantly change because thoughts are unstable by nature. Yet people build their entire emotional life around them. This is why Buddhism teaches that attachment to thought creates suffering. The mind creates endless stories, and human beings become emotionally imprisoned inside those stories, especially at night. Because nighttime removes distraction and exposes the relationship you have with your own mind, many people discover in silence that they have been speaking cruelly to themselves for years. They would never speak to another human being the way they speak to themselves internally. The mind constantly attacks them, judges them, pressures them, shames them, and after enough time, the inner world becomes emotionally exhausting to live inside. This is why so many people fear being alone with themselves before sleep, not because silence is dangerous, but because the voice inside the mind has become deeply painful. But Buddhism teaches something beautiful here. The goal is not to destroy the mind. The goal is to stop blindly worshipping every thought it produces, because not every thought deserves belief. Not every fear deserves obedience. Not every emotion deserves complete control over your identity. Sometimes a thought is simply a passing storm moving through the sky of the mind, and storms always pass. The more awareness grows inside you, the more clearly you begin seeing this. Thoughts come, thoughts go. Fear comes, fear goes. Sadness comes, sadness goes. But awareness remains, still, quiet, present beneath it all. And slowly, when you stop attaching your identity to every painful thought, something begins softening inside you. The mind no longer controls your entire emotional state. You stop drowning in every mental wave. Instead, you begin sitting beside your thoughts with calm observation, and little by little, the nighttime voice that once terrified you starts losing its power, because you finally realize just because the mind says something does not mean it is who you are. The more you try to silence the mind, the more power you give it over you. One of the most painful traps people fall into at night is the desperate need to force their mind into silence. The moment they lie down in bed and thoughts begin appearing, panic quietly starts growing inside them. They immediately think, "Why can't I stop thinking? Why is my mind doing this again? I just want peace. I need these thoughts to disappear." And without realizing it, they begin fighting their own mind. This inner resistance creates a silent war inside the body. Part of the mind is creating thoughts. Another part is desperately trying to destroy those thoughts. And the more this struggle grows, the more exhausted a person becomes. Buddhism teaches something deeply important here. What you resist often becomes stronger. This is why the harder people try to force the mind into silence, the louder the mental noise often becomes. Every fearful thought creates tension. Every attempt to control the mind creates more frustration. Every effort to stop overthinking turns thinking itself into an emotional battle. And slowly, nighttime becomes associated with stress instead of rest. The person begins fearing their own thoughts before they even arrive. This is why many people feel anxious the moment they get into bed. They are no longer only afraid of life's problems. They are afraid of their own mind, and that fear feeds the cycle even more. The mind notices resistance immediately. The moment you panic about a thought, the brain labels that thought as important. It begins paying even more attention to it, and suddenly the thought grows stronger, simply because you reacted to it with fear. This is why trying to force yourself not to think almost never works. Imagine someone telling you, "Do not think about the ocean." Immediately, the image appears in the mind. The harder you try not to think about something, the more attention you accidentally give it. The human mind works in very similar ways with fear, anxiety, and overthinking. The moment you become emotionally terrified of your own thoughts, you begin feeding them energy constantly. Buddhism compares the mind to muddy water. If muddy water is constantly disturbed, it remains cloudy. But when left alone without force, the dirt slowly settles naturally on its own. The mind behaves the same way. When you constantly fight your thoughts, analyze them, fear them, or try to control them, the mind stays emotionally agitated. But when awareness stops struggling against every thought, the mental noise slowly begins calming itself naturally. This is one of the deepest misunderstandings people have about peace. Peace is not the result of controlling every thought. Peace is the result of changing your relationship with thought itself. Many people believe peaceful individuals have completely silent minds all the time. But this is not true. Peaceful people still experience thoughts. They still experience fear sometimes. They still experience emotional waves. The difference is this: they no longer panic every time a thought appears. They no longer treat every thought like an emergency. A fearful thought comes, and they allow it to pass. An anxious feeling appears, and they observe it gently instead of resisting it violently. This creates inner softness instead of inner war. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows strongest when the mind becomes divided against itself, one part trying to escape, one part trying to control, one part trying to suppress. This constant inner conflict slowly drains emotional energy from the soul, and many people spend years exhausting themselves this way without realizing it. They wake up already fighting their thoughts. They spend the entire day mentally resisting emotions, and at night, the struggle becomes even louder because silence exposes the full intensity of their inner conflict. But the more deeply you observe the mind, the more you begin understanding something important. Thoughts are temporary by nature. Even the loudest thoughts eventually fade when they are not constantly fed with fear and resistance. Think about clouds moving across the sky. No cloud stays forever. Thoughts work the same way. But most people grab onto every thought emotionally. They analyze it, they argue with it, they fear it, they try to remove it immediately, and through this constant engagement, they accidentally keep the thought alive much longer. The mind becomes trapped in a loop of resistance. Buddhism teaches that awareness breaks this loop. The moment you stop fighting a thought, you create space around it. You begin realizing, this is only a thought. This feeling will pass. I do not need to panic. And strangely, this acceptance begins calming the nervous system. Not because the mind becomes instantly silent, but because the fear surrounding the thoughts begins disappearing. This is why acceptance is so powerful in Buddhist wisdom. Acceptance does not mean you enjoy painful thoughts. It does not mean you surrender your life to suffering. It simply means you stop turning every mental experience into a war. Because the truth is, many people are not suffering only from their thoughts. They are suffering from the constant fight against their thoughts. The exhaustion comes from resisting themselves every night. And over time, this resistance creates emotional burnout. A person becomes tired not only from life, but from the non-stop battle happening inside their own head. This is why compassion matters so deeply in healing. Sometimes the mind does not need more control. Sometimes it needs gentleness. The mind softens when it feels safe. The nervous system calms when it stops feeling attacked internally. And slowly the person begins understanding something life-changing. I do not need to force silence to experience peace. Real peace appears naturally when struggle begins ending. The mind may still produce thoughts before sleep. Fear may still visit occasionally. Memories may still appear in the darkness. But now there is space around those experiences. No panic, no desperate resistance, no war. Just awareness quietly watching the mind without becoming trapped inside it. And eventually, something beautiful begins happening. The night no longer feels like a battlefield you must survive. Instead, it becomes a place where the mind slowly learns how to rest again. Your mind feels heavy at night because your soul has been emotionally exhausted for too long. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep alone cannot heal. A person can sleep for hours and still wake up feeling emotionally drained. Their body may have rested, but their inner world still feels heavy. They move through the day carrying an invisible weight they cannot fully explain to anyone around them. And at night, that hidden exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore. This is why so many people suddenly feel emotionally overwhelmed before sleep. The mind becomes louder, the heart feels heavier, and sadness begins appearing without warning. A person may not even understand exactly what is wrong, yet deep inside they feel tired in a way that goes far beyond physical fatigue. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from living too far away from your true inner state for too long. Many people spend years disconnecting from themselves without realizing it. They become experts at functioning while silently breaking inside. They continue smiling in conversations even when they feel emotionally empty. They continue helping others while secretly feeling lost themselves. They continue carrying responsibilities while their nervous system quietly becomes exhausted beneath the surface. And slowly, this emotional pressure begins accumulating inside the mind and body. The human soul was never meant to carry endless stress without rest. It was never meant to constantly perform, suppress emotions, chase validation, fear the future, compare itself to others, and pretend everything is okay all at the same time. But this is exactly how many people live. They spend the entire day surviving emotionally. By the time nighttime arrives, the body finally stops moving, and the emotional exhaustion rises into awareness all at once. This is why nighttime sadness often feels deeper than sadness during the daytime, because during the day, distractions numb emotional pain temporarily. But silence removes the numbness, and in that silence, the soul finally reveals how tired it truly feels. Many people do not realize how exhausted they are because they have become used to surviving in constant emotional tension. They have spent so many years living under pressure that stress begins feeling normal to them. But the body always remembers. The nervous system remembers every unprocessed emotion. The heart remembers every disappointment. The mind remembers every moment of silent suffering. And at night, when life finally becomes still, those emotions slowly rise back to the surface, asking for attention. This is why some people suddenly begin crying before sleep, without fully understanding why. The tears are not always caused by one specific event. Sometimes the tears come from accumulated emotional exhaustion that has been silently building for years. The soul reaches a point where it can no longer continue carrying everything quietly. And Buddhism teaches something deeply compassionate here. You are not weak for feeling emotionally tired. You are human. There is nothing unnatural about becoming exhausted after carrying invisible emotional burdens for too long. Many people have spent years abandoning themselves emotionally. They constantly prioritize productivity over peace. They push themselves beyond healthy limits. They suppress sadness because they believe they must always appear strong. They ignore loneliness. They ignore burnout. They ignore the emotional wounds inside them because life keeps demanding more from them every day. But eventually the mind begins protesting. The body begins slowing down. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed. The heart becomes emotionally fragile. And nighttime becomes the moment where all the hidden exhaustion finally speaks honestly. This is why the mind often feels heaviest before sleep. Not because you are broken, but because your inner world has been carrying too much for too long without enough compassion, rest, stillness, or emotional safety. Buddhism teaches that suffering deepens when people become disconnected from their own humanity. Many people treat themselves with less kindness than they would offer a stranger. They pressure themselves constantly, judge themselves harshly, expect themselves to endlessly endure emotional pain without softness or understanding. But healing begins when compassion returns. Not self-hatred, not constant pressure, compassion. The mind cannot truly rest in an environment filled with internal violence, and many people unknowingly create violent inner worlds through non-stop self-criticism, fear, perfectionism, and emotional suppression. At night, when silence removes distraction, they finally feel the full emotional weight of how harshly they have been living inside themselves. This is why Buddhist wisdom places so much importance on gentleness toward the mind, because a tired soul does not need punishment. It needs peace. It needs permission to stop performing for a while, permission to breathe deeply, permission to admit, I am tired. I have been carrying too much. I need rest emotionally, not just physically. And sometimes that simple honesty becomes the beginning of healing. The moment a person stops pretending they are okay when they are not, the inner world begins softening. The nervous system begins feeling safer. The heart stops fighting so hard. The mind slowly stops screaming for attention, because finally someone is listening to the pain instead of ignoring it. And perhaps this is why the night feels so emotional for so many people. Nighttime is often the only moment in the entire day when a person's soul finally gets the chance to speak honestly without interruption. No performance, no distractions, no pretending, just truth. The truth that they are exhausted, the truth that they feel emotionally overwhelmed, the truth that they have been carrying silent pain for far too long. But Buddhism teaches that awareness of suffering is not the end. It is the beginning of freedom from suffering, because once you finally become honest about your inner exhaustion, you can begin caring for yourself differently. You stop treating rest like weakness. You stop treating your emotions like enemies. You stop forcing yourself to survive endlessly without compassion. And slowly, little by little, the heavy mind that once felt impossible to calm begins softening under the warmth of awareness and gentleness, because the soul does not heal through pressure, it heals through peace. Real peace begins when your attention finally returns to this present moment. One of the deepest reasons the mind cannot rest at night is because it is almost never fully living in the present moment. The body may be lying in bed, but the mind is somewhere else entirely. Sometimes it is trapped in the past, replaying old conversations, reliving painful memories, revisiting regrets, thinking about things that should have been said differently, punishing itself for mistakes that can no longer be changed. And other times, the mind rushes into the future, imagining problems that have not happened, predicting failure, creating fearful scenarios, trying to control tomorrow before tomorrow even arrives. This is how many people live every night. Their body exists in the present, but their attention is endlessly traveling between yesterday and tomorrow. And because of this, peace never fully reaches them. Buddhism teaches that the mind suffers whenever it abandons the present moment for too long, because the present moment is the only place where life is actually happening. Not in memory, not in imagination, not inside fearful mental stories. Only here, only now. But modern life trains people to constantly leave the present moment. The mind becomes addicted to overthinking. It searches endlessly for problems to solve, answers to find, fears to prepare for, and slowly, the person loses connection with the simple stillness of being alive right now. This is why nighttime often feels emotionally chaotic. The world becomes quiet, but the mind continues running endlessly through time itself. A person may be completely safe in their room, yet mentally reliving heartbreak from 5 years ago, while simultaneously fearing problems that may never even happen. And after enough time, the nervous system becomes exhausted from carrying so much psychological weight. Buddhism teaches something incredibly healing here. Most suffering is not happening in the present moment. It is happening inside the mind's relationship with the past and future. The past creates regret. The future creates fear. But the present moment itself is often much softer than the mind allows itself to notice. This is why awareness is so powerful before sleep. Awareness gently brings your attention back to reality instead of mental imagination. The feeling of your breathing, the quietness of the night, the softness of the blanket, the air touching your skin, the slow rise and fall of your chest. Simple things, but deeply sacred things, because the present moment asks nothing from you except awareness. It does not demand perfection. It does not ask you to solve your entire future tonight. It does not force you to relive every painful memory. The present moment simply says, be here. And for many people, this becomes the beginning of healing, because they suddenly realize how rarely they truly allow themselves to exist peacefully in the now. The mind constantly says, what about tomorrow? What about next week? What about the future? But Buddhism reminds us that life can only ever be lived one moment at a time. The future has never once arrived all at once. It always arrives as this moment, and this moment, and this moment. Yet people spend their lives sacrificing today's peace, trying to mentally control tomorrow. This endless mental time travel is one of the biggest reasons the mind becomes restless before sleep. The mind believes it must solve everything immediately, in order to feel safe. But real peace does not come from solving every possible future problem. Real peace comes from learning how to remain present even when life feels uncertain. This is one of the deepest forms of inner freedom, the ability to sit in stillness without mentally running away from yourself. At first, this can feel uncomfortable because many people have spent years escaping the present moment through distraction, stimulation, overthinking, and emotional avoidance. Silence feels unfamiliar to them. Stillness feels almost threatening, but slowly, awareness changes this relationship. The more present you become, the more clearly you begin seeing how much unnecessary suffering the mind creates through constant mental movement. You begin noticing that many thoughts are not helping you, they are simply exhausting you. You begin realizing that not every thought deserves your full attention. Not every fear deserves emotional control over your nervous system. Not every memory deserves endless replaying. And gradually the mind begins slowing down naturally, not because you forced it to stop, but because awareness brought it home to the present moment again. Buddhism often compares the mind to a wild monkey constantly jumping from branch to branch. One moment it jumps into the past, the next moment it swings into the future. It rarely stays still long enough to experience peace, but awareness gently calms the monkey mind, not through force, not through punishment, but through presence. The moment your attention fully returns to the now, something beautiful begins happening inside the body. The nervous system softens, the breath becomes deeper, the heart feels lighter. The mind slowly realizes, in this moment, I am safe, not tomorrow, not next year, now. And perhaps this is why the present moment feels so healing, because it frees you from carrying the entire weight of your past and future all at once. The present moment is small enough to breathe inside. This breath, this silence, this stillness, nothing else is required right now. And when this understanding becomes deeper inside you, nighttime slowly begins changing. The bed no longer feels like a place where the mind tortures you. Instead, it becomes a space where awareness gently welcomes you back to yourself, back to your breathing, back to your body, back to this moment. And little by little, the mind that once felt impossible to quiet finally begins resting inside the peace of simply being here. The mind finally grows quiet when you stop treating yourself like an enemy. Many people spend their entire lives fighting themselves without even realizing it. They fight their emotions, they fight their thoughts, they fight their sadness, they fight their anxiety, they fight every part of themselves that feels imperfect, wounded, emotional, afraid, or tired. And slowly their own inner world becomes a place filled with pressure instead of peace. This is one of the deepest reasons the mind becomes so loud before sleep, because nighttime removes distraction and exposes the relationship you truly have with yourself. During the day, you can temporarily escape that relationship. You can stay busy enough to avoid hearing your own inner voice clearly. But at night, when the room becomes silent and life slows down, the truth becomes impossible to hide. Many people discover in those quiet moments that they have not been speaking to themselves with kindness for a very long time. The voice inside the mind becomes harsh, critical, impatient, demanding. It constantly says things like, "You should be doing more. You are falling behind. You are not strong enough. You should have healed by now. You are wasting your life. You are not enough." And after hearing this voice every single day for years, the nervous system becomes exhausted. The heart begins feeling unsafe inside its own inner world. Buddhism teaches that suffering becomes much deeper when a person loses compassion for themselves, because healing cannot grow in an environment filled with inner violence, and many people unknowingly live inside emotional violence every day. They constantly pressure themselves, judge themselves, compare themselves to others, attack themselves for struggling, feel ashamed for being emotional, feel guilty for resting, feel weak for needing peace. Eventually, the soul becomes tired of being treated like an enemy by its own mind. This is why nighttime often feels emotionally painful. The silence finally reveals how exhausted the heart has become from carrying constant self-judgment. Many people believe they need to become perfect before they deserve peace. But Buddhism teaches the opposite. Peace begins the moment you stop demanding perfection from yourself. Because the truth is, you are not a machine. You are a human being, carrying emotions, memories, fears, wounds, disappointments, hopes, exhaustion, and invisible battles that nobody else fully sees. And sometimes the mind becomes loud before sleep, not because you are broken, but because some part of you is begging for compassion instead of criticism. A tired heart does not need more pressure, it needs gentleness. A wounded mind does not need hatred, it needs understanding. Many people think healing happens through control, through forcing themselves to become stronger, through suppressing emotions harder. But Buddhism teaches that true healing begins through awareness and compassion. The moment you stop attacking yourself for being human, something inside you slowly softens. The nervous system relaxes, the breath becomes lighter, the mind stops fighting so aggressively, because finally, the inner world no longer feels like a battlefield. This is why self-compassion is so powerful. Not because it removes every painful thought overnight, but because it changes the emotional atmosphere inside your mind. Imagine carrying heavy emotional pain while someone constantly screams at you to do better. The suffering becomes even heavier. This is exactly how many people treat themselves internally every single day. They are already emotionally overwhelmed, yet they continue punishing themselves for struggling. And slowly, this creates deep emotional exhaustion. Buddhism teaches that awareness without compassion can become cold, but awareness combined with compassion becomes healing. The goal is not simply to observe your suffering. The goal is to hold your suffering gently without hatred, to sit beside your pain without abandoning yourself, to feel emotions without shaming yourself for having them, to admit, yes, I am tired. Yes, I have been hurting. Yes, I need peace too. This honesty becomes sacred because many people spend years pretending they are okay while silently collapsing inside, but the heart always longs for truth. And nighttime often becomes the moment where truth finally rises into awareness. The truth that you have been too hard on yourself. The truth that you have been emotionally overwhelmed for too long. The truth that your mind has been starving for softness and rest. This is why the mind sometimes becomes emotional before sleep. Not to punish you, but to show you the parts of yourself that still need love and care. The sadness wants comfort. The anxious mind wants safety. The exhausted soul wants permission to rest. And slowly, when you begin responding to yourself with compassion instead of constant pressure, the inner world changes. The mind begins trusting you again, because for the first time in a long time, you are no longer trying to destroy your pain. You are listening to it. You are sitting beside yourself gently in the darkness instead of running away. And this changes the entire experience of nighttime. The bed no longer feels like a place where your thoughts attack you. Instead, it becomes a place where healing quietly begins. A place where you finally stop abandoning yourself. A place where your heart can breathe honestly. A place where your soul no longer has to pretend it is strong every second. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you force into existence. Peace appears naturally when inner conflict begins ending. And perhaps the deepest form of healing is this: learning how to become a safe place for your own mind to rest. Because once the heart no longer feels attacked from within, the mind slowly stops screaming for attention. And little by little, the silence that once felt painful begins feeling peaceful instead. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you finally stopped treating yourself like someone who needed to be fixed before deserving love, rest, and peace. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a very long time, you do not need to fight your mind anymore. Maybe the thoughts that keep returning before sleep are not trying to destroy you. Maybe they are simply the parts of yourself that have been unheard for too long. The exhausted part of you asking for rest, the anxious part asking for safety, the lonely part asking for warmth, the emotional part asking to finally be treated with kindness. instead of pressure. Buddhism teaches that peace does not arrive when the mind becomes perfectly silent. Peace arrives when you stop turning your inner world into a battlefield. Because the truth is, you were never meant to carry this much emotional weight alone. You were never meant to spend your whole life running from your own thoughts, punishing yourself for feeling deeply, pretending to be strong while quietly breaking inside. And maybe this is why the night affects you so deeply. Because when the world finally becomes quiet, your soul finally gets the chance to speak honestly, not through words, but through feelings, through heaviness, through restlessness, through the silent ache inside your chest that simply wants peace. So tonight, instead of fearing the silence, try listening to yourself with compassion, not judgment, not frustration, not resistance, just gentle awareness. Breathe slowly, let the thoughts come and go like clouds passing through the sky. Stop trying to solve your entire life before sleep. Stop demanding perfection from yourself tonight. You have survived enough battles already. Your heart deserves softness too. And perhaps healing begins the moment you finally realize this. You are not broken because your mind gets loud at night. You are simply a human being who has been carrying too much for too long without enough rest, understanding, and inner peace. So let tonight be different. Let tonight be the night you stop running from yourself. The night you stop fighting every thought. The night you stop abandoning your own heart. The night you finally sit beside yourself with patience and compassion, and slowly, little by little, the mind that once felt heavy and restless will begin softening in the silence again. Not because life became easier, but because you finally became gentler with yourself